Hi there. I want to focus now on lesson 1 of this discipleship curriculum. And I'm actually going to focus at the beginning here with only the first part of lesson 1, your story. So all the stuff highlighted in yellow excuse me, is what I will want you to do in this after I finish with this first part here. So let's get started. In this document that you should have, lesson 1A, your story, it says, if you know Christ, you have a story. And so what we're talking about, nothing fancy here. It doesn't have to be, I was in drugs and then, or I was in prison and then, this happened, whatever. That's not the elements of necessarily a successful story. The success of being with Christ is that you are with Christ. That's the success part. Wherever you came from, whether you were a nice moral person who had an inner heart that was rebellious like me, if God brought you out of that to now that you are with Christ, that is a success story. If you were actually doing drugs and now he's brought you to be with Christ, that is a success story. It doesn't matter where you've come from, it matters where you are now, that you are now with Christ. And so I guess this is the pause I would have for anyone watching this. If Jesus is not real to you, that he's not a real and living person who demands your life, if he is not a living God who you follow, and who you walk with, maybe some days he feels closer than others, I don't know, but if he's not anything more than just a historical figure that somewhere he once lived and you kind of remember some things about him and you read the Bible about him, if that's all he is, then that's a problem. He wants you. He's very clear on that. We'll talk about that more as we go further, but he wants you, and he wants to be your Lord, and he even wants to live in you. We'll also talk about that in later videos. Without further ado, let's go through a few of these passages just to get a little picture of what I'm talking about. As I said, if you know Christ, you have a story to some degree. And I'll help you formulate that here. First off, Acts 17:26 through 27, it tells us this. And he, that's God, and God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. So it's saying, look at when God made Adam, way back when. From that one man, all the people we see now, all the nations we see now have come into existence. And they live on the face of the earth. God determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. You see that? God has decided where or when, that's the period, and where all people will live. So God has decided that. Why? Verse 27. That people, they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. So this is saying that there's no person out there and no place out there that is not without a chance to find God. That they could grope, they could find somehow, if there's someone interested in some place, God decided when and where everyone would live, including the people watching this video. God has determined where you are living, what time of history you're living. And so that you could find him, but then also you could now make him known to others. There's actually a verse in Romans 10. It says, how will anyone know about Jesus if no one is there to preach to them? So you now are held responsible. If you know Jesus, you are now the witness. You are the light in the area that you're around to tell people about who Jesus is. Okay, So we see that God has determined every place and every time that we live in, including right now, wherever you're watching this from. Let's go next. Mark 5:18 through 20 is an interesting story. I highly recommend you read the entirety of it, starting with Mark 5, verse 1. It's the story of a demoniac, someone who had so many demons in him that were ravishing him so much, excuse me, that they took him and they would put him in these caves, and they would try to lock him in these caves, but he would break the chains and he would cut himself and he would be naked and he would do all these vicious things to himself that they just could not control. They just tried to kind of control him. Maybe you know of those kind of people in our society. Maybe you are one of those people that no amount of control will help you. You have some inner issues, and he had demons that were going on. So then Jesus comes to the place, excuse me, and the demons start talking to Jesus right away. And they say, "Who are you? And what do you have to do with us? Will you please?" And they're all of a sudden they're so polite and so nice. Read this story. It's because they understand Jesus has real power. And so they say to Jesus, "Please don't just kick us out of this place. We actually kind of like this place." Which is interesting. Demons, I guess, like certain places to live. "We like this place. Can you send us in that big herd of pigs over there?" And Jesus says, "Fine." So he sent them out of the man. That was the whole point of Jesus coming there with the demons. He's saying, "You're leaving this man." And he allowed them to go into this herd of pigs, and thousands of pigs went, and they went face first down a cliff into the water. They just killed themselves. You can see the destructive nature of those demons just went in this herd of pigs, and boom, they're all in the water. Amazing story. And so the man who saw this all happen, all of a sudden it says he was sitting and he was in his right mind. And everyone from the town was saying, "Oh my goodness, what just happened? We've been trying and trying and trying, and Jesus just shows up, and this man is normal now? What just happened?" Okay, so that's where we pick up this story. And now at the end of it, Mark 5:18 through 20, I want you to read this. It says, that's talking about Jesus, as Jesus was getting into the boat, so he had taken the boat over to meet the man. Now he's getting in the boat to leave the man who had been possessed with demons begged Jesus that he might be with him. It makes sense. That man who had just had a destructive life, all of a sudden Jesus frees him from all that destruction. And it makes perfect sense that the man with demons would say, "I want to be with you. I want to just go with you. Please let me go." What does Jesus say? Verse 19, Jesus did not permit him to come in the boat. But Jesus said to him, "Go home to your friends." And I just want to point out, some translations say friends, some say family. It just means your close relations is what that word means there in the original Greek when it was written. So it says, "Go home to your friends or families, your close relations, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. And tell them how God has had mercy on you." So what did the man do? He went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. I want to point something out. If you have been saved from destruction, which if you know Jesus, you have been saved from destruction. Maybe it wasn't quite as glamorous and flashy as the man who was in the cave beating himself. Maybe you had other issues. I don't know what they are, but if you know Jesus, you've been delivered. Our first tendency is to say, "We just want to be with you, Jesus." And that is great. Jesus wants us to be with him. And but he also wants us to do something while we're on this short time we call life. He wants us to spread his story to others. And so he gives us some insights in this here. Where to go and who to talk to. He says, go home. So start where you're already at. We already talked about in Acts 17, God put you in a place and a time period. go to those people and go to your people you're already close with. Your family, your friends, your others that God has already given you networks and relationships with. Go to them and tell them simply what God's done for you. Tell them how He changed your life. Tell them how you used to be doing one thing and now you're doing something else. So that's the instructions we have before us in Mark 5. Okay, the next one. Get rid of Mark 5 and go here. Another example is in John 4. Here it says, this is the example, and some of you might know this story, of a woman at the well. And again, this is the least of the community. This is a Samaritan woman. She's not even really she's considered a second-class Jew. She's not really a purebred. And she's a woman. She's already got two things against her in those times. And then she's also a loose woman. She's had 5 husbands. So she's pretty much the outcast of society. And guess what? She's the one who Jesus decides to go and spend a little time with and reveal Himself to. Amazing, this Jesus we serve. And I want you to think about this right now. Maybe you're trying to look for the posh, the polished, the really good people to share Jesus with. Maybe He wants you to go to the very outcast. They tend to be the best people because they're ready and eager because no one else has given them a chance. So God would say, go to those outcast people. And then when Jesus went to this outcast person, look at in John 4:28. We'll just read this first part here. After Jesus shared hope to her and shared the gospel and shared forgiveness, it says, the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to Him. So notice what the woman does. She had this amazing, miraculous encounter with Jesus. And she doesn't say, oh, I gotta stay. She's like, I need to tell people about this. I have a whole community that I'm from. And so she actually left her jar. She was so excited. And she went away into the town. And she told the people of that town, come, listen, here's what I can tell you. She doesn't even say, I'll give you the full story. She said, you're going to have to come to Jesus yourself. That's fine. You don't have to tell someone every detail on how they know Jesus. But you should tell them how Jesus had mercy on you, how He changed you, how He revealed Himself to you, something like that. And then let them come and meet Jesus themselves. And then the conclusion of that, verse 39, it says, many Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. She said, He told me all that I ever did. She just simply reported what Jesus did for her. And many believed her, or believed Jesus because of her. Okay, so that brings us to our final point. Hopefully you've seen so far with these, when I'm talking about you repeating what I'm teaching you here, you can repeat what I showed you in these stories. You don't have to. This is just to give you a little bit of vision. To get you off your butt a little bit and to say, you know what? You have people in your life that God's put in your life for a reason. And not only that, you need to go and tell them your story about Jesus and teach them to tell their story about Jesus to others so that they can repeat. You get what I'm saying? So we want to have everyone sharing the Jesus story that they have. And so the last example I want to give here, and I'm going to read this one out. This is in the Acts 21, which is the book of Acts is the first 30 years of the church's history. Right after Jesus resurrected, now we have 30 years of a brand new church. Acts 21 is kind of in the heart of that time, right in the middle of that, and you have a church leader named Paul. An amazing man. Everyone hated him because he shared his story with a lot of people. He used to be this aggressive Jew who hated Christians, and now Jesus got a hold of him, and now he was following excuse me, he was following Jesus. And so the people wanted to kill him and hurt him. And so right in the middle of this kind of an exchange where the people were a little upset about Paul and they wanted him to stop talking about Jesus, I want you to see what Paul does to try to sway their opinion, try to get this crowd to think seriously about Jesus. So let's enter this story. We're in Acts 21. It starts a little earlier in Acts 21, but we'll look at verse 40. After receiving the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd when they all were silent, and he said something to them in Aramaic. So, hold on, let me grab my water here, and I'm going to grab a stopwatch. All right. So, first off, Paul is speaking in their own language. I love this. We should do the same. We don't need to use these high theological words or whatever. Just talk to people where they're at. Talk to people in their own language. So Paul is using Aramaic here, and he finally gets the crowd's attention. And starting with verse 1 until 21, Paul gives his story. So this is a great example of giving our story, and I'm going to show you how long it takes. I'm going to start a timer, stopwatch I should say, and I'm going to start it when I start reading, and I'll look at it afterwards, and we'll see how long did it take Paul, or us reading Paul now, to share his story. Let's find out. Starting with verse 1. Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel. I was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way, that's Christians, to their death. I arrested both men and women and threw them into prison. As the high priest and all the council can tell you themselves, they can testify, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up. Be baptized and wash your sins away, calling on his name. When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Excuse me. Okay. stop the stopwatch. I don't know if you can see. It took me 3 minutes to read that. I should say the last response. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this, that he was going to go to the Gentiles. Then they raised their voice and shouted, "Rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live." So they were riveted. They were listening. He got their attention, and they were highly offended. And that's also a lesson for us. Just because you share a true testimony of Jesus does not mean people will not be highly offended. They probably will be, and that's probably a good sign that you're actually sharing Jesus right. Doesn't always mean that way. Sometimes we can be obnoxious in a way that we should never be. But we're not trying to be obnoxious, but we are trying to share Jesus. And it can offend people who do not want to follow Jesus. But it also will bring hope to the people who do. Excuse me. All right. So, you saw that there. Let's go back here. Well, how long did that take me? I wasn't going that fast, I don't think. It took me 3 minutes. Paul shared 3 main components. He shared his life before encountering Christ. Then he shared how he encountered Christ. And then he shared his life with Christ. All right? And that's at the end of this video where I want to challenge you to try the same thing. I'm going to have you think about it this way. Practice sharing your story with other Christians until you are confident. I will practice my own here. I'll give you an example before I go. And then, but what we're hitting on, if you can see this here, you're hitting on your life before Christ. And I'm going to say 1 to 3 points are recommended just to think about. You're encountering Christ, 1 point, and your life with Christ, 1 to 3 points. Let me highlight that there. That's what we're practicing now. That's what Paul did in Acts 21, which we just read. He focused on those 3 points. And that's what we're going to focus on now. So let me try it. I'm going to set the timer again here. And I'll try to do it within 3 minutes as well. All right, so first, I'm pretending I'm talking to you as a friend or a family member. I want to share. I would love to tell you about something that happened to me. It had actually happened in 2000, so I can remember it. It was so it was about 16 years ago. I was in high school, and up to that point, so now I'm sharing life before Christ. Up to that point, I had been a good moral person. I went to church a lot because my parents forced me to, basically. And so, good moral person. I went to church, but I really was embarrassed to talk about Jesus, and I wanted really nothing to do with following him. I just was with him when it kind of worked for me, like I prayed to him when it made me feel good or kind of like I needed to, or I knew I did something wrong. So, okay, quick prayer for forgiveness. But he was not Lord of my life. So that was my life before I met him. And then, now we're going to encounter Christ. And then there was a time where I guess 2 things happened. So I'm sharing 2 points here. 2 things happened to me at once. One was my grandmother, who I was close with, died, and it made me start thinking, what happens when my grandma, or when someone dies? Can my grandma see me now? And in fact, I was at some friend's house and just doing some things that I knew was wrong and I was ashamed of, and I didn't want my grandma to know I was doing it. And she had just died, and I looked up and I said, "I'm sorry, Grandma," and I was apologizing to the air because I didn't know if she could see me. I felt kind of bad about it. And so my grandma died, and then I also had someone speak at I heard someone speak in like a church event, and he said, if you claim that you're a Christian, but your life does not look radically different than your non-Christian friends, you're not really a Christian. And I needed to hear that. I needed someone to offend me like that. Because my life, I had all non-Christian friends, and my life looked just like their life. So those things struck me, and all of a sudden I said, I want to follow Jesus now. I don't want to play the game anymore. if my grandma maybe can see my sin, God can see my sin even more. So Jesus showed me how to follow you. So then at that point, that was October of 2000. I said, show me how to follow you. All of a sudden, a few things changed. One was I didn't want to do the things that my non-Christian friends wanted to do. My life started looking radically different. There was an inner change in me. I started actually thinking of others. I used to be so self-centered. Now I was helping others and wanting to help others. Excuse me. Another thing that happened was there was someone at my school who hated Christianity, and he would give all the reasons why Christianity can't be true. And I started studying these things because I said, well, I think it is true. And I looked into it, and I started studying the Bible, seriously looking at it, and I started seeing this book is real. It is really, really real. And the more I would read that, the more I would get in love with Jesus, and I would talk to him. And so at that point, I started to have a real relationship where he wasn't just, hey, here to help me when I need like a Santa Claus God. He was now the Lord of my life. I said, how can I follow you? And that all happened 17 years ago, and I could never look back, would never look back. There you go. So that took maybe a little long. That was 4 minutes, but I would aim for, I usually say 1 to 5 minutes long. So 5 minutes would be a good max. But try that now on your own. All right. So this is the end of this part of this video. Lesson 1A, your story. Now I want you to practice sharing with others your life before encountering Christ. Actually, I'll look it down here. Your life before Christ. Think about 1 to 3 points. You're encountering. What was it like when you encountered Christ? And your life now that you're with Christ. What does it look like? The hard, the good? I don't know. But share those things. And this is meant to be a teaser. It's meant to be a movie trailer, if you will. This is not the gospel. The gospel we're going to get to next. That's the main story of how Jesus came to save us and forgive our sins and reconcile us to God. We'll talk about that later. But this is meant to be a bridge. It's meant to talk to people, to start introducing spiritual conversation right away. And I would ask them also, I forgot to mention this, after you share your story, say, what's your story like? Do you have a story about God? What do you think about God? Those kind of questions are great because now you have a dialogue and now you're seeing where they're at and you're gauging it. And it's a great setup for you to explain the gospel, which we'll talk about next.